25 meters.
It's a megalodon.
Impossible.
So glad I'm not crazy.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top roll sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Em and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 346, The Meg. This is a podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. That's going to tell me your story and I'm going to say no. You're going to offer me money and I'm going to say no. You're going to try to appeal to my better nature and I'm still going to say no because I don't have one. Welcome to Verbal Diorama, whether you're a brand new listener to this podcast, whether you're a regular returning listener. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to this podcast. I am so happy to have you here for the history and legacy of The Meg. And of course, if you are a regular returning listener, thank you so much for continuing to listen and support this podcast over the last 7 years and now 346 episodes. It genuinely means so much to have your continued support. And if you are a brand new listener, there are a lot of episodes for you to catch up on. And maybe if you do, you will then become a regular returning listener. I've had a week off. I actually went down to London and I went to the podcast show, which was a lot of fun. And now we're in the month of June, except technically I'm recording this in May, but it is the month of June. And one of the things that I love to do on this podcast specifically is something called Kaijune. I mean, you can kind of guess what it is. And it's always been a very popular month on this podcast for me, especially because I make these episodes, but also for listeners as well, because I love hulking great big monster movies. I also love shark movies. And for me, the dumber the better when it comes to shark movies. Jaws is, of course, a classic, and I love that movie with all my heart. But I'm also very fond of its cheesy sequels. I love Deep Blue Sea. In fact, there's not many shark movies that I don't enjoy. And so I remember very well when The Meg was announced and when it was cancelled and then when it was announced and then when it was cancelled. And so I know that this has been a movie that was long in gestation. But this is also a movie that very much knows what it is and fully embraces it as well as a PG-13 shark movie can. And so this movie is going to be kicking off Kaijune, which is basically a month of kaiju movies. And if you're not aware, kaiju are basically big monsters. And there are not many movies as big as The Meg, and not many have been tried to be made for 30 years. But this is one megalodon movie that refused to die. Here's the trailer for The Meg.
What's that?
There's a monster outside.
What you people discovered is bigger than we ever thought possible.
How big is that thing?
It was the largest shark that ever existed.
A living fossil.
Thought to have been extinct for over 2 million years. Wrong.
My God. It's a megalodon.
He's kidding, right?
That thing's out there. We need to find it and kill it.
Why don't you just put a tracker on it? Did you guys ever watch Shark Week?
He looks heroic, but he's kind of got a negative attitude.
Chew on this, you ugly.
5 years after a tragic deep-sea encounter that ended his career, deep-sea search and rescue diver Jonas Taylor is called back into action when a research submersible is disabled at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The crew, including his ex-wife, is trapped by a massive creature previously thought to be extinct, a megalodon, a 75-foot prehistoric shark. As the ancient predator escapes its deep-sea thermal prison and heads towards populated waters, Jonas must team up with a group of scientists from the research facility Mana 1 to stop the ultimate apex predator. Facing impossible odds and his own past trauma, Jonas leads a desperate mission to destroy the Meg before it unleashes a bloodbath on the beaches of China. Let's run through the cast. We have Jason Statham as Jonas Taylor, Li Bingbing as Su Yin, Rainn Wilson as Morris, Cliff Curtis as Mac, Winston Chow as Zhang, Ruby Rose as Jax, Paige Kennedy as DJ, Robert Taylor as Hella, Jessica McNamee as Laurie, Sophia Kai as Mei Ying, Olafur Darri Olafsson as The Wall, and Masi Oka as Toshi. The Meg has a screenplay by Dean Georgaris, John Hober and Eric Hober, was directed by John Turteltaub, and was based on Meg, a novel of deep terror by Steve Alten. Unlike sharks themselves, shark movies are far from endangered. Since Jaws burst onto boats chomping down on people in 1975, there have been countless imitations featuring different sharks or indeed other predatory large animals like piranha, grizzly, alligator, anaconda, orca, the crocodiles of Lake Placid, and big worms under the desert in Tremors, as well as Jaws' own sequels. Jaws was both imitable and unique because nothing can top it, not even genetically enhanced sharks like in Deep Blue Sea. It's worth adding at this point that Jaws is episode 106 of this podcast. Jaws 2, Jaws 3D and Jaws the Revenge is a triple episode 224. Anaconda is episode 302. Lake Placid is episode 303. Tremors is episode 41. And Deep Blue Sea is episode 146. As I said, I love big, dumb monster movies. And then there's the notoriously bad mockbuster parodies like Sharknado, Mega Shark vs Giant Octopus, and Sand Sharks, made for TV and DVD by studios like The Asylum and basically created to be so bad they're good cult films. Arguably, whether they are so bad they're good or so bad they're bad is yet to be agreed. Sharks have also featured prominently in small-scale thrillers like Open Water in 2003, which was made with real sharks, 47 Metres Down in 2017, and The Shallows in 2016. Cinema's obsession with sharks, even prehistoric ones, is yet to become extinct. Unlike the megalodon, which became extinct about 3.6 million years ago and swam in the Earth's oceans over 23 million years ago. While paleontologists have found examples of fossilised teeth, their bodies were mainly built from cartilage instead of bones. Cartilage is rarely preserved in the fossil record, making a full megalodon skeleton difficult, if not impossible to find. This has made its true size a decades-long paleontological mystery. Research estimates that some megalodons could grow to 50 to 65 feet long, and they snacked on animals as large as orca whales. Some shark scientists theorise that a natural decrease in prey, coinciding with the emergence of the great white shark, led to the extinction of the megalodon. Others proposed that the same warm-blooded biology that likely fueled their massive size made them particularly sensitive to environmental changes. And as we know, there were several climate change and geological events which did things like changed currents, precipitation, and also led to the cooling of the oceans. It could mean that a lack of warm water and the expansion of glaciers led to the megalodon's ultimate demise. But the story of The Meg starts with the novel and its author, Steve Alten. He grew up in Philadelphia and earned degrees in physical education, sports medicine, and a doctorate of education. He struggled to support his family of 5 and he decided to pen a novel that he'd been thinking about for years. Working late nights and on weekends, I hear you, Steve, he eventually finished Meg, a novel of deep terror, and he was such a struggling indie author that he sold his car just to pay for the editing fees. Then, as luck would have it, on Friday the 13th of September 1996, he lost his job. 4 days later, his agent had secured a 2-book, $2.1 million deal with Bantam Doubleday, purely based on the strength of Meg. Meg went on to become the book of the 1996 Frankfurt Book Fair. It was published in July 1997, hit every major bestseller list, including the New York Times, and became a popular radio series in Japan. The novel follows Dr. Jonas Taylor, a former Navy deep-sea submersible pilot turned marine paleontologist who's convinced that the remnant population of Carcharodon megalodon lurks at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The central conceit is that the deepest parts of the ocean are warm enough at the floor due to hydrothermal activity to have sustained a population of megalodons in isolation from the surface world. The novel was the first instalment in a series of books following Jonas Taylor and his encounters with the titular megalodon. The series continued with the sequels The Trench in 1999, Primal Waters in 2004, Hell's Aquarium in 2009, followed by a prequel, Meg Origins, in 2011, and then followed by 2 more sequels, Night Stalkers in 2016 and Generations in 2020. The 7th and final instalment, Meg Purgatory, came out in 2022. But why sharks, specifically megalodons? Well, Steve Alten was 15 when Jaws hit cinemas in 1975, and seeing it led to him reading Peter Benchley's novel. From there, he read every true-life great white shark encounter he could find. In most of those books, there would be a paragraph describing the megalodon, usually accompanied by a black and white photo of 6 scientists sitting inside a set of megalodon jaws. The image lodged in his imagination for 20 years until a Time magazine article about the Mariana Trench gave him the idea to build a story around the trench and have the megalodon living within it. Jaws didn't just inspire him thematically, it also helped shape the way he aimed to write his story to be different to Jaws. He found the opening shark sequence in Jaws genuinely thrilling, but then he found he had to flick through 4 or 5 chapters to get to the next thrilling sequence. So he decided when writing Meg that he wasn't going to give readers that experience. He wanted non-stop action piece after action piece, with one leading directly into the next. He loved Jaws, but he wanted more literal Jaws, more teeth, more shark sequences. And like many authors, having it be adapted into a movie was a pipe dream at first. But then, as he was nearing publication, it all started to fall into place, for the time being anyway. Michael Linton of Hollywood Pictures, Disney's more mature content division, acquired the rights to Meg before the book was even finished in late 1996 and set about adapting the novel for the big screen. The screenplay process was a mess from the start. Tom Wheeler was hired to adapt the book, but having decided his script wasn't good enough, the studio hired Jeffrey Boehm to write a new draft, and Boehm's script was later rejected for the same reason. But it wasn't just competence that was the issue. Alten himself was horrified by the creative direction the screenplay was going in, with them famously sticking wings on the shark. It was the last straw for Alten, the literal jump the shark moment. He denounced the adaptation, but that wasn't what got the project halted. Even setting aside the scripts, the project was doomed institutionally. When Michael Linton left Hollywood Pictures in 1997, his replacement, Tony Vinciquerra, declined to greenlight any of the pictures that Linton had started developing. And then Warner Brothers announced Deep Blue Sea, a rival shark film, and Disney backed down entirely, putting The Meg into turnaround. The general consensus at the time was that there wasn't room for two big shark movies, despite Hollywood's love for twin films in the 90s that we all know and love. And Deep Blue Sea's modest commercial performance when it was released in 1999 only reinforced the nervousness about the genre. And if you look closely, there are many similarities between The Meg and Deep Blue Sea. By 1999, Alten had released the sequel to his book, called The Trench, and eventually the film rights to The Meg returned to him, and he decided to write his own treatment. He sent it out via producer Nick Nunziata, and it landed in front of Hellboy director Guillermo del Toro, a huge favourite director of this podcast and this podcaster. Del Toro loved the story and championed it among the New Line executives he knew, like Lawrence Gordon and Lloyd Levin, but Del Toro didn't want to direct it himself. So they subsequently got in touch with Speed and Twister director Jan de Bont and brought him onto the project to direct it instead. New Line Cinema still struggled with the concept of Alten's treatment, feeling that it was too similar to Jurassic Park, and so they then hired Shane Salerno, best known for co-writing Armageddon, to rewrite the script. However, Salerno's draft drifted far from the source material, feeling more like Moby Dick. Once again, Steve Alten was furious with the script Salerno turned in. While Alten wasn't happy, New Line were, as long as the budget came in at $100 million. But in 2005, the film couldn't be made at that price. Salerno's script was estimated at $157 million, and it could inflate to $200 million. They managed to cut almost $20 million, but it wasn't enough. New Line eventually cancelled The Meg, and a studio spokesperson blamed the expensive script and the lack of choice of director and producers. Jan de Bont, however, called it a completely blown opportunity and blamed the studio for the film's demise. The rights reverted to Alten once again in October 2007, and ironically in 2008, New Line would fold into Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers are coming up next. In 2007, Alten posted publicly about how the movie version of The Meg was extinct at New Line Cinema. The project went quiet for a couple of years until 2009, when production began under producer Belle Avery through her Apel's Entertainment banner, with Alten once again writing the screenplay. Avery was introduced to Jiang Wei, the general manager of Gravity Pictures, in 2014, and together they agreed the film would make an ideal Chinese-American co-production. The film was ultimately co-financed by three parties: Flagship Entertainment, Gravity Pictures, a division of China Media Capital, and Warner Brothers. Gravity Pictures would handle distribution in China, while Warner Brothers would handle the rest of the world. Gravity Pictures consciously downplayed their involvement with the initial marketing because US-China co-productions had a bit of a bad reputation in the past, especially within China. So they downplayed their involvement on purpose, wanting to emphasise it as a high-profile Hollywood big-budget monster movie. Setting it near China made sense geologically too, because although the Mariana Trench wasn't exactly next door to the country, it was within a reasonable distance for a megalodon to reach Chinese shores. The revival of The Meg as a movie was also partly driven by the renewed appetite in Hollywood for monster movies. The modern US remake of Godzilla and the legacy sequel Jurassic World in 2014 and 2015 respectively had both been hugely successful, and interest in the genre was back. In 2015, director Eli Roth became attached to the Meg project, and he literally dove into his research, including a gig hosting Discovery Channel's Shark Week, where he literally swam with sharks. Joining Roth's version of the movie was screenwriter Dean Georgaris, who was brought in to write a completely new script separate to Steve Alten's version. Georgaris was known for his big-budget action scripts, and Warner Brothers was keen to make the movie similarly toned. As it turned out, Roth's vision for the movie was more in line with a brutal bloody gore fest than a tame PG-13 action comedy. So due to creative differences, he left the movie in March 2016, only to be replaced by Jon Turteltaub the very same day, the well-known director of hits like Cool Runnings, While You Were Sleeping, and National Treasure and its sequel Book of Secrets. John and Eric Hober were also brought in to do rewrites on George R.S.'s draft. A few months after Turteltaub signed on, so did Jason Statham. Not many people know that Jason Statham, before he became cinema's hard man, was a member of Great Britain's national diving team, and he competed for England in the 1990 Commonwealth Games in the 10 metre, 3 metre and 1 metre events, coming 10th, 11th and 8th respectively. It was while he was training in London that he was spotted by a sports modelling agency and signed by Tommy Hilfiger, Griffin and Levi's for various modelling contracts during their 1996 Spring-Summer collection, with many brands wanting a normal masculine look. But he supplemented his modelling income with market stall work, and it was this that led to him to be cast by Guy Ritchie in Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels in 1998, followed by Snatch in 2000. He was mostly cast in action roles, and he's previously appeared on this podcast for his role as Handsome Rob in the remake of The Italian Job in 2003. That's episode 256. That was a lovely little double episode with the remake and the original. Producer Lorenzo Di Bonaventura wanted an actor who could be the tough guy, but also carry the emotional weight of his own trauma. For the earlier 90s and 2000s iterations of The Meg, author Steve Alten's personal fan cast for Jonas Taylor was Kurt Russell, specifically the Snake Plissken era Russell. The producers wanted Jason Statham, and in August 2016, Statham was announced as taking the lead role of Jonas Taylor, something that Steve Alten himself has said that he is fully on board with. Principal photography on The Meg began on the 13th of October 2016 in West Auckland, New Zealand, and ended on the 4th of January 2017 in Sonia City, Hainan, China. And with an original March 2018 release date, they'd have about a year on post-production and visual effects. They also planned to convert the movie to 3D in post-production, which was done by Legend 3D. And of course, the Megalodon itself was a fully digital creation across the entire film, with no practical shark elements at all. The production visual effects supervisor was Adrian DeWett, and the work was distributed across multiple vendors, including Scanline VFX, Sony Pictures Imageworks, DNEG, Image Engine, Soho VFX, and Weta Workshop. Director Jon Turteltaub specifically didn't want the Meg to look like a great white shark. He wanted audiences to immediately know they were not looking at a normal shark. The broad proportions were based on a great white, but the team made significant tweaks. Despite this, the Meg still has the typical great white shark light belly, which it wouldn't need if it was dwelling in the Mariana Trench. Scanline VFX had actually been involved with the film for over 10 years by the time it came out, meaning that their design work on the shark predated even Turteltaub's involvement, which is a direct consequence of the production's long development history, because the studio continued to build the creature through multiple director changes and studio transitions. And of course, when you're talking about a creature that literally no longer exists, you still have to make sure it moves convincingly. And the central problem was that the closest living reference for a megalodon is a great white shark, which audiences know instinctively well enough to notice if something doesn't feel right. The team needed to build a functional anatomical structure that mimicked a great white, but scaled it up to 75 feet, and give it the right weight and mass to sell its size. They described the megalodon as a big living soft balloon. On every sharp turn you needed to see ripples travelling through the body. And to achieve this, Scanline used Ziva VFX, a physically based muscle and skin simulation tool. It required building the shark's skeleton anatomically correct as a starting point, and the system would then make muscles and skin move in physically accurate ways, preventing intersections and unnatural folding. Sony Imageworks visual effects supervisor Sue Rowe described the look she was after as that of a thoroughbred racehorse, specifically the way a racehorse's muscles visibly shudder and ripple, communicating enormous power. The muscle ripple effect was ultimately exaggerated beyond strict realism for dramatic effect. But one of the most persistent challenges in making a 75-foot prehistoric shark movie is making the shark read as genuinely enormous. Real underwater footage causes light and detail to drop off after about 10 to 15 feet from the camera, which is a significant problem when your shark is 75 foot long. You can't make every shot a close-up. They also found that the Meg alone on screen simply didn't read as 75-foot prehistoric shark. It only looked like a 75-foot prehistoric shark when it was given context or something else in shot for comparison, such as a small child, a dog, or a human adult. To help establish scale, they also used monster lighting, backlighting the shark when it came close, adding rim light catching the teeth, and then lighting it slightly from underneath. And lighting would be a core issue in the Mariana Trench because they needed to find a reason for there to be any light in a place that in reality is in total darkness. And the production solved this through storytelling. The first submersible launches deployable lights resembling spherical Chinese lanterns, which are tethered to an anchor that descends to the sea floor, so the light hovers 10 to 15 feet above it. And this gave the filmmakers a diegetic in-world light source to justify illuminating the environment. But even then, when the Meg does show up at the bottom of the trench, you can hardly see it. And that was a deliberate intent for those early scenes, again paying homage to Jaws and barely showing the creature. The Mariana Trench itself was an entirely digital creation, handled primarily by DNEG under VFX supervisor Raymond Chen. DNEG used customised procedural tools to populate the vast ocean floor environment and control the amount of haze. Not counting the terrain itself, there were over 30 different assets that needed to be created, like tube worms, coral, jellyfish, fish, spider crabs, isopods, and hydrothermal vents. The vents were scattered procedurally in Houdini, with large cloud simulations coming up from them. And despite the fact that this is a movie that doesn't really take science very seriously, the visual effects team did spend significant time researching whether the film's premise was scientifically plausible, studying the deep sea environment and how water behaves at extreme depth. The design of the underwater vehicles aimed for a sense of transparency to give audiences a realistic window into the undersea world, but the darkness and pressure couldn't be realistically depicted, as well as the thermocline, a layer of hydrogen sulfide gas, which creates a barrier that seals off a warm lower section of the trench that is completely invented for this movie. The Mariana Trench is the deepest known part of Earth's oceans, located in the Western Pacific. It reaches a maximum depth of approximately 36,000 feet, which is over 10,900 metres or over 6.7 miles at a point called Challenger Deep. It is deeper there than Mount Everest is tall. The trench is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a tectonically active region where tectonic plates collide, causing subduction, which is where one plate dives beneath the other. The movie suggests that hydrothermal activity has created a previously unknown thermal layer where life, like megalodons, can survive. Despite being located in the tropics, temperatures in the Mariana Trench are near freezing due to its depth and lack of sunlight. The immense pressure and total absence of solar energy means the ambient water temperature at Challenger Deep sits around 1 to 4 degrees Celsius. There is no warm, habitable thermal layer sitting beneath a cold thermocline. The trench does have genuine hydrothermal activity though. Cold seawater in deep cracks within the Earth's crust is heated by cooling magma, becomes buoyant and rises to the seafloor. Though rather than forming a warm pond, the hot fluid rises like a hot air balloon into the cold ocean, cooling rapidly as it mixes with the frigid surrounding water. active hydrothermal vents have been confirmed in the trench at depths greater than 8 kilometres, accompanied by large temperature gradients. And these vents do support life. A typical deep vent consists of layers of microorganisms, as well as dense aggregations of amphipods and copepods, which graze on bacteria, with larger animals like crabs, shrimp, gastropods, tube worms and cephalopods preying on those. But the heat is highly localised around the vent openings themselves. It dissipates almost immediately into the surrounding cold water, rather than creating any kind of stable, warm ecosystem at scale. So the general idea that a thick thermocline of warm water sitting below the cold layer, creating a hidden biosphere warm enough to sustain a population of 75-foot apex predators for millions of years, just doesn't hold up. If anything, pressure and cold increase uniformly with depth. A megalodon sustaining warm pocket at the bottom of the Challenger Deep would require an entirely different ocean physics than we currently have. But then, this is a movie about an extinct 75-foot shark, so I guess we can pull the plug on too much realism. And now a word from our sponsors, which is you, if you'd like to be. Thank you for listening to this podcast. It's completely independent, made by me, and relies on listener support. If you're enjoying this episode and the work that I do, and you want to support an indie podcaster, if you have some spare change, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. You're under no obligation. This podcast is free and always will be, but there are a couple of ways you can help if you wish to and if you have the means to. You can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can subscribe to the Patreon to support the show monthly at verbaldiorama.com/Patreon. All money made goes back into this podcast by paying for software subscriptions, website hosting, and new equipment. Huge thank you for your continued support. Now, let's learn some more about this movie and how Keanu Reeves is somehow connected to it. It's time to segue into the obligatory Keanu reference of this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I try and link every movie that I feature with Keanu Reeves because he genuinely is the best of men. And obviously, I've already mentioned a very good potential Keanu reference in Speed director Jan de Bont. But I've used Jan de Bont a couple of times over this podcast, and I do like to try and mix things up a little bit. So the next best, easiest way to link Keanu to this movie is through Ruby Rose, because Ruby Rose co-starred with Keanu in John Wick Chapter 2. And can you imagine John Wick taking on a megalodon? I feel like we all know that John Wick would win, right? The score for The Meg was composed by Harry Gregson Williams, and the soundtrack includes an upbeat Thai cover of Hey Mickey by Pim, which was made famous by Tony Basil in the 80s, which itself was a cover of Racy's original version from 1979, which had the title Kitty. The trailer for The Meg uses the 1959 Bobby Darin version of Beyond the Sea, which is the English language version of the 1946 French song La Mer by Charles Trenet. Unfortunately, the movie itself doesn't use Beyond the Sea, which is a real shame because it's such a fun song and perfectly encapsulates the dumb fun brilliance of this movie. And that's the biggest point to make about The Meg. This was always going to be a PG-13 popcorn movie rather than an R-rated horror thriller. And the marketing leaned into the comedy with taglines like opening wide and pleased to eat you, and the fun trailer with the aforementioned Bobby Darin song. Summer movies should be fun, silly escapism, and the posters also leaned into the links to Jaws, with a great white swimming upwards to a lone swimmer and the Meg underneath the shark, showing the size difference. There were even a series of promotional images using photos of beachgoers and swimmers of varying body types with nutrition facts labels next to them, with serving size and calories. Apparently, an average human contains 242,225 calories, just so the Meg knows how many to eat in one sitting. The Meg was initially scheduled to premiere on the 2nd of March 2018, but it was later pushed back to a summer release of the 10th of August 2018. And when it did eventually open, it opened at number 1 at the domestic box office, beating incumbent Mission Impossible Fallout and Christopher Robin. It fell to second in its second week after Crazy Rich Asians topped the box office, but it stayed at second for 3 weeks and remained in the top 10 for 6 weeks. On its claimed, although disputed budget of $130 million, some estimates say it's more like $178 million, The Meg grossed $145.5 million domestically, $383.8 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $529.3 million. It needed a reported $400 million to break even. It debuted higher than predicted and became the highest grossing movie of Jason Statham's career. Critically, critics are mixed, shall we say. Rotten Tomatoes has The Meg at a rating of 47%, with a consensus of The Meg sets audiences up for a good old-fashioned B-movie creature feature, but it lacks the genre thrills or the cheesy bite to make it worth diving in. One of my favourite reviews for this movie comes from The Observer, where reviewer Wendy Ide gave it 3 stars out of 5 and said, quote, "The film certainly gets its money's worth out of the monster shark. We get numerous thrilling shots of it hurtling towards the camera with the voracious, dead-eyed determination of a Kardashian, and plenty more of the gaping maws of doom looming up behind unwitting kids and animals," unquote. And dead-eyed determination of a Kardashian is a great line. Kudos, Wendy. The Meg was nominated for a Golden Raspberry Award in Worst Prequel, Remake, Rip-Off or Sequel as a rip-off of Jaws, but it lost to Holmes and Watson. And there was a sequel, Meg to the Trench, was released in 2023 with the same writers but a new director in Ben Wheatley. Jonas Taylor also lost another wife. In the 5 years since the first movie, his romance with Soo Yin had turned to marriage, and also he'd become widowed. But he remained a father figure for her teenage daughter Mei Ying, and raised her along with Soo Yin's brother Ju Ming. It's somehow even more silly than the first, and it's enjoyable enough. But a third Meg film remains in the trench as of the release of this episode. And the problem with Meg 2 The Trench was it came out at the same time as Barbenheimer, so possibly didn't do as well as the studio hoped. As I've mentioned, I love dumb fun monster movies, and The Meg isn't out here to get its PhD in marine biology. This is a 75-foot prehistoric shark terrorising a research station in the middle of the Chinese Ocean that moves on to terrorise a beach full of tourists. There's no more to it than that, and that's its charm and brilliance. And full disclosure, I've never been the biggest Jason Statham fan until he starred in Spy. Genuinely, that movie changed my opinion of him. He was funny, charming, and everything you expect in a spy comedy. And I think it's genuinely one of the best spy comedies. So really, I may not have even given the Meg a chance without seeing him in Spy first. But he's so good in this. He's a great leading man. He's good with the action. He's great in the water. And I love his character's more tender scenes with Mei Ying. It's not often that macho lead actors are allowed those sorts of sweet interactions with child characters. And their relationship is lovely. And it, of course, sets up the romance between Jonas and Soo Yin, which I also kind of like. So many of the side characters in this movie are clearly Meg Chow, but I was surprised they killed off Zhang and not Jonas's ex-wife, because surely the ex-wife is always the first to die, but it was a nice little subversion, I guess. This is a 90s B-movie creature feature with 2010s visual effects. I do understand the PG-13 rating, it is a 12 here in the UK, but I really feel like an unrated cut would be so much fun. The main issue, and the issue that all shark movies continue to face, and will continue to face ad infinitum, is the unflattering comparison to Jaws. This is nothing like Jaws, but it does pay homage to it with a little dog being called Pippin, a nod to the dog Pipit in the original Jaws. There's also nods to Jurassic Park in there, as well as Godzilla, because without mankind's hubris and the relatively stupid idea of sending humans to a place never before seen, the Meg would never have escaped the trench in the first place. With this movie, and with most movies like this, just don't think about the science and you'll be fine. Because I even struggled, I started to question while I was watching the movie how the Meg could even survive outside of the Mariana Trench. And I had to stop myself because dumb fun monster movie. But realistically, anything that lives down there, with the pressure and no light source, simply wouldn't survive near the surface, let alone in shallow waters near a beach. And it would probably have no eyes for Jonas to stab, because why would you need eyes when you live in perpetual pitch black darkness? Why would it know what whale song was? There are no whales in the Mariana Trench, and don't even get me started on how a supposed alcoholic could have the physique of Jason Statham. Comparisons to the book aren't really worth it because they're wildly different, and it's just loosely based on Steve Alten's first book. A planned opening with a T-Rex that's in the book couldn't be done for this movie due to budget constraints, but if you've seen Meg 2: The Trench, they popped it in there instead. There are levels of shark movie. You have the lower tier Sharknadoes, Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, Sharktopus, Three-Headed Shark Attack, Sand Sharks, basically anything shark-based from the asylum. They're there, they exist. You can find fun things to enjoy in them, and I certainly have, but they are literally at the bottom of the shark tier list. Then you've got your mid-tier shark movies, and this is where the Meg happily sits alongside Deep Blue Sea. Various Jaws sequels. I still state Jaws 3D is not a bad movie, and I won't hear any slander against Jaws the Revenge, not in this house. But you've also got movies like Bait, Under Paris, The Shallows, which I'll admit was too tense for me to finish watching, so I probably do need to finish that one at some point. I need to put on my big girl pants and watch that movie. But then S tier is just Jaws. It's always Jaws. It's never not Jaws. Jaws remastered and re-released. Jaws is the king of shark movies for a reason, but it's not the biggest shark. That honour will always be the Meg's, and that's why it's the perfect start to Kaijune. Thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Meg, and as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. And if you like this episode on the Meg, as I mentioned, there's a lot of other shark/creature feature movies that I've done on this podcast before. Jaws, episode 106. Jaws 2, Jaws 3D, Jaws the Revenge, episode 224. Anaconda, episode 302. Lake Placid, episode 303. Tremors, episode 41. Deep Blue Sea, episode 146. And there are other Kaijune movies out there too that are literally just about Kaiju movies. But as I said, it's a genre that I particularly love, so that's why so many episodes exist. But as always, give me feedback, let me know what you think. For the next episode, Kaijune continues with The King. And I know I said Jaws was king, but this is the literal king, the original, the Kaiju movie that's had countless sequels and remakes, with 10 official live-action features, with number 11 due out in 2027. It has inspired other films as well as 5 TV shows. And surely when we talk about the king of the kaiju, we are talking about King Kong. Debuting in 1933, Kaijune is going to be featuring the one, the only Kong. So join me next week for the history and legacy of 1933's King Kong. Thank you for listening to Verbal Diorama, a totally free and independent podcast that relies on listener support. If you want to show your support in multiple different ways, you could leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast. You could tell your friends and family about this podcast, or you could find me and follow me on social media and you can share the podcast that way. I am at Verbal Diorama across social media, where you can share posts, like posts, comment on posts. It all helps really to get the word out there, to hopefully get other people to know this podcast and know the recent episodes that I've put out. I genuinely love doing this podcast, and anything you could do to help would be so appreciated. A huge thank you to the incredibly generous patrons of this podcast. I could not do what I do without their support. To Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Ian, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas, Zoe, Kev, Danny, Stu, Brett, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip, Adam, Elaine, Aaron and Steve. Please consider joining them and supporting this podcast on Patreon if you have the means to. If you want to get in touch, you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can also go to verbaldiorama.com and you can fill out the contact form. You could say hello, you can give feedback, or you can give suggestions as well. I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can also DM me on social media as well, if that's an option available to you. I love to hear from people and I always try to respond as quickly as possible. Thanks again for listening, and thanks for supporting independent podcasting. It means more to us than you know. And finally,
Jonas, we've got nothing left.
Almost nothing.
How are you gonna kill him?
Evolution. I'm gonna make this thing bleed. See, and what you said before, you were right. It's not about the people you lose. It's about the people you save. Signing off.
bye.